B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, March 20th, 2019. I've got a lot of news to comment on today, and I thank you for clicking on my podcast and feeding it into your ears through earbuds or speakers or in your car, however you do it. In two separate reports, a former UN official known as a rapporteur says that sanctions kill, and that we are seeing manipulation and swimming in an ocean of lies related to the efforts to foment regime change in Venezuela. Alfred de Zayas, a top legal scholar who was a senior lawyer for decades on the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights staff, he's now a professor of international law at the Geneva School of Diplomacy, that's in Switzerland, and he served as a UN independent expert. He is one of the few who actually visited Venezuela. He spent time there in November and December of 2017, and then he wrote a report, a detailed report, saying that economic warfare and sanctions led by the U.S. have devastated Venezuela, drastically hurt its civilian population, and he delivered his report last September to the UN Human Rights Council. But, as we'll quote from him in a separate interview in a moment, the UN hasn't been interested in his report because it doesn't support regime change. And he says that while the consensus view is that Nicolas Maduro is an obstinate dictator who is holding on to power and refusing to yield, well, he says that Maduro has demonstrated a clear willingness to negotiate when he's engaged with in good faith. He said that when he left Venezuela, he handed the foreign minister a 6-page memo with several demands, and the government promptly obliged. Then he asked for the release of 23 people, and Maduro released 80 people. He called on the government to negotiate the release of a German journalist, Billy Six, and after 2 months, the government released him and returned him to Germany. Now, this is not to say that Nicolas Maduro is without sin, that he is some sort of a perfect leader, but he is the legitimate leader of Venezuela. And de Zayas criticized previous reports on Venezuela by the UN, saying that they were unprofessional and politicized. He said they violated the most fundamental principle of methodology, the principle of listening to all sides. Those two reports, he said, are political pamphlets. And in a January interview with Britain's Independent, Alfred de Zayas said that the U.S. could be vulnerable to war crimes charges for the economic warfare against Venezuela. And he says that sanctions kill. He compares them to the way in medieval times that cities or towns were blockaded. He said modern-day economic sanctions and blockades are comparable with medieval sieges of towns. 21st century sanctions attempt to bring not just a town, but sovereign countries to their knees. And he found that there are problems in the economy, overdependence on oil, poor governance, and corruption, but that economic warfare practiced by the U.S. and its allies are the primary cause of the crisis in Venezuela. And, of course, this isn't popular with the regime change actors like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Elliott Abrams. Oh, yes, Elliott Abrams. He recently held a news conference where reporters confronted him about the fact that the instant president, or more accurately, the interim president, Juan Guaido, declared himself the president of Venezuela in the middle of January. And if you read the Constitution of the state of Venezuela, it says that such an interim president can only serve for 30 days. That means that whatever mandate he claimed expired in the middle of February. And the big showdown on the bridge with Colombia, when Abrams and Pompeo and all these guys were trying to claim that Maduro was rejecting humanitarian aid, the Trojan horse that we attempted to push over his border, even that occurred after the expiration of the initial interim period that Juan Guaido could serve or claim to serve as president under the Constitution. So I want you to listen. This is over 2 minutes long, but it's a fascinating dance as Elliott Abrams tries to claim that not only is Guaido legitimate, but that he is still the interim leader, even though his interim service hasn't commenced because Maduro is still in power. Listen.
Could you explain to us the article under which Mr. Guaido declared himself president? It is said that it has expired last month. Could you explain that to us?
As to the Venezuelan Constitution, the National Assembly has passed a resolution that states that 30-day period of interim presidency will not start ending or counting until the day Nicolas Maduro leaves power. So the 30 days doesn't start now. It starts after Maduro. And that's a resolution of the National Assembly.
When did they did that? After he...
They did that, this is roughly a month ago. We could try to find the date for you.
When he was took the mantle of
when
president, that wasn't there.
That's correct.
Can you do that ex post facto like
when
that?
people ask a question, how do...
like saying, you know, I was elected for 4 years to be president, and then 2 years in, you changed the rules so that your term didn't start, hasn't even started yet.
Well, you don't get a vote because you're not in the National Assembly. But
You're not the National Assembly either.
Does the U.S. view that as constitutional under their system?
Yes. I mean, we're taking the National Assembly is the only legitimate democratic institution left in Venezuela. And their interpretation of the Constitution, as you know, is that as of the date of this alleged term for Maduro, the presidency is vacant. But
it's not.
They have also said that 30-day period starts
the sky is green
when Maduro goes.
So Guaido is the interim president of an interim that doesn't exist yet.
The 30-day end to his interim presidency starts counting because he's not in power. That's the problem. Maduro is still there.
He's never been in power. This is pure bullshit. And Elliott Abrams knows it as it leaves his lips. He knows he is lying. And it's clear that this National Assembly, which is controlled by the wealthy opposition, by the oligarchs, may have passed a measure, but that's not the same as a constitutional amendment. And they have no power because Maduro is still the legitimate leader of Venezuela. We have created a cartoonish situation here where the U.S. and its allies pretend that Maduro has vacated the presidency when that is clearly not true, and that Guaido is he's in the on-deck circle, right? I'm sorry that I'm laughing because these are serious matters. But there is no other way to respond to this artful dissembling that Elliott Abrams is trying to foist on reporters. And it's interesting, that clip's been available for 24 hours, and I haven't seen it reported in a corporate media outlet. I also want to note some good reporting at The Intercept today. Let's credit Matthew Cole and Kim Ives for a piece that shows how the U.S. effort to destabilize and change leadership in Venezuela is having a negative effect in the region, and in particular in Haiti. And we covered this back in February, where a group of American mercenaries arrived in Port-au-Prince early on a Sunday morning, and soon they found themselves locked up. Now, their mission, we are told by this article, was that on behalf of the current president of Haiti, whose name is Jovenel Moïse, that they were trying to move some money from Haiti's central bank. And the claim was that this was to stabilize the democracy led by President Moïse. But there is a dispute between Moïse and his prime minister. They are fighting over control of an $80 million fund, which is skimmed off the top of a generous deal that Venezuela gave Haiti, advancing $4 billion in cheap oil and allowing Haiti to repay it over 25 years at an interest rate of 1%. But that leaves cash from the sale of the oil or the gasoline products derived from it, and that goes into a fund that is supposed to be paying for reconstruction and development in Haiti. The article notes that it's unclear what Moïse intended to do with the money once he gained control of it. But he brought in these a team of 6 American mercenaries, and these guys are rank amateurs. So they show up at the central bank, and the security guard refuses to let them in and calls the cops. So they wind up in custody, and they're saying, hey, we came here on behalf of the administration, and now, we're caught in this power struggle. It's a fascinating sidebar to the mess that we have created in Venezuela. Back here in the United States, a federal judge ruled Tuesday that the Interior Department has violated federal law by failing to take into account the climate change impact of oil and gas leasing in the West. This has led to an injunction blocking, at least temporarily, any kind of exploration or exploitation on 300,000 acres in the state of Wyoming. That is what is before the court, a case brought by Wild Earth Guardians and Physicians for Social Responsibility. They said, hey, you cannot lease these federal lands for carbon extraction without considering the impact on the overall country and on the planet. Given the national cumulative nature of climate change, considering each individual drilling project in a vacuum deprives the agency and the public of the context necessary to evaluate oil and gas drilling on federal land before irretrievably committing to that drilling. That is a quote from the court ruling. He did not void the leases outright, but has ordered the Bureau of Land Management to redo its analysis of hundreds of projects in Wyoming. And if you're a daily listener, you know that on Monday, I was among the first nationally to report on the important ruling by the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here in San Francisco that was reported late last Friday. And that is that the trial court judge who issued an injunction on construction of the Keystone XL pipeline last November, that ruling has been upheld by the Ninth Circuit. That means that only the Supreme Court can unblock the injunction that prevents completion and further construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. So I did a little Google search just as I sat down here. The terms I used were Keystone XL, Ninth Circuit, and news. And get this. As of, 5 days after the court issued its judgment, the news has been picked up by the Digital Journal, by Bloomberg, by the Great Falls, Montana Tribune, by a news service called Biological Diversity, by the Dakota Free Press, and by the Associated Press. No mention of any other major news outlet, including cable news channels, including major newspapers like The Times, USA Today, or The Washington Post. I don't know why this is being blacked out, but I'll continue to press, and I've scheduled an interview with the one of the lead attorneys in the Keystone case, Stephen Volker, and we'll be bringing that your way, hopefully in the next few days. Another important court case was ruled on, or at least the jury issued its decision after 4 days of deliberations following a 2-week trial, and they ruled that Roundup, Monsanto's herbicide, was likely the cause of a California man's cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The plaintiff in the case is 70-year-old Edwin Hardiman. He said that he used Roundup for over 25 years and that he believes that that is what caused his cancer. And this jury is the first federal court trial of thousands of lawsuits. And the judge in the case, Vince Chhabria, it's spelled Chhabria, he said it is the first of what he's calling 3 bellwether trials. There are 760 cases against Monsanto around the nation that have been transferred to his court, and more than 10,000 are pending elsewhere. Now, the judge did yield to a demand from Monsanto, now owned by the German conglomerate Bayer, to split the trial into phases. And in this phase, they found Monsanto responsible for this man's cancers. And the next phase of the trial will determine the liability and what kind of penalties Monsanto will have to pay. Now, in the previous case, a state court trial in San Francisco last summer, Dwayne Lee Johnson, age 46, who also has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, after working with Roundup when he was a groundskeeper at a public school, well, he won an award of $289 million, and a court later reduced that to $78.5 million. In either case, these are substantial penalties for Monsanto/Bayer, and I am pleased to see the progress in the courts. And, of course, Monsanto is using a tobacco industry-style defense. The science confirms glyphosate-based herbicides do not cause cancer. They're not responsible for Hardiman's illness, they say. Roundup and glyphosate have been used safely and successfully for over 4 decades worldwide. Yeah, right. Denial. It is a river in Africa and a very effective legal strategy. Well, the United States is busy getting ready to meddle in a foreign election. I don't know that we are hacking into their websites and releasing embarrassing information, but we are actively meddling in the Prime Minister's election in Israel, scheduled just a couple of weeks away. Bibi Netanyahu will be campaigning in Washington, and this year he hasn't been invited to give an address to a joint session of Congress. He's going to the White House for a meeting, then coming back the next day. The meeting's on Monday next week. Then on Tuesday, he's got a dinner with Trump. In between, he will rally the troops and the Benjamins over at AIPAC. That's the other big reason that he's coming. And keep in mind that in 2015, when Netanyahu was up for re-election, Barack Obama declined to meet with him. He cited a long-standing policy of avoiding the appearance of influencing a democratic election in a foreign country. But, of course, Trump, he's not politically correct like that. He wouldn't let anything like that get in his way. Today, I'm linking in the show file for today's podcast to a recent column by Tom Friedman. And I derisively refer to him in our show file today as the Oracle of the Middle East. I do respect his experience. I don't always respect his judgment. And in today's dispatch, which comes from Amman, Jordan, he lists 5 ways that he says the pillars of the Middle East are falling. He says, for starters, there was always a deep U.S. involvement in shaping the future of this region. But look around. The U.S. doesn't even have ambassadors in Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, the UAE, Jordan, or Saudi Arabia. And the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Trump's former bankruptcy lawyer, is so enthralled with the right-wing Jewish settler movement that he's more a propagandist than a diplomat. That is deadly accurate. Second, there's always been some kind of Israeli-Palestinian peace process pushing for the best two-state solution. Bye-bye, he says. Today, the U.S. and Israel seem engaged in a search for the best one-state solution. Third, Arab governments could always guarantee jobs for their populations in bureaucracies or security services, jobs where you could come late, leave early, and work another job on the side. Bye-bye to that, he says, because of falling oil prices. And number 4, the days when information flowed only from the top down and Arab governments can control the voices in their countries are long gone. With Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, and those cable channels like Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, well, the leaders don't control information. And finally, the erosion of the dominance of the patriarchy. He says in the past, men could dominate women through formal and informal religious, cultural, and legal norms, but with young women from Saudi Arabia fleeing male control, things are going to change whether they want it or not. He closes by saying the problem is the hour is late, political reform has been postponed too long, and old cultural norms are still deeply rooted outside of Amman. As one Jordanian minister put it to Friedman, we have to do everything, we have to do it all right, and we have to do it fast. Well, that's actually a reasonable piece of commentary from Tom Friedman, best I've seen in a while. Meanwhile, in Britain, London Bridge is not falling down, but it appears the institutions of government are crumbling. Theresa May is backed into a corner. She can't call another vote in the House of Commons because the Speaker has said she can't. The European Union is not too excited about agreeing to a delay when they don't know what the outcome will be. Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party leader, remains stubbornly unwilling to state clearly whether he favors remaining or leaving the EU. And she is a leader without any followers. Theresa May is. So the decision now means that Theresa May is at the mercy of the leaders of the EU as she begs for a 3-month extension to avert Britain crashing out of the Union without any agreement and into a future set of arrangements that no one can fully anticipate. The reverberations would be felt widely in Britain and elsewhere, with complex supply chains disrupted in ways few can predict and the economic damage unpredictable. Simply put, things are a total mess. That's pretty honest. And it is sad. It truly is. In the European Union, Google has been fined for the third time, in this case the amount $1.7 billion, related to their unfair advertising policies. And here is basically their admission of what they've been doing wrong. They are going to make changes in the operations that they have. It'll allow users in Europe to switch to another web browser and a search engine on Android. Currently, they can't. To allow more competition when customers shop with Google, the company said it would give other shopping sites more prominence in its search results. I don't know what that really means. Google said it would do the same with local search queries, such as when a person browses for a restaurant, a move that could help companies like TripAdvisor and OpenTable in Europe. So, when I look at this, I say, where are the American regulators? This underscores that Elizabeth Warren is right, that we do need to regulate the tech giants. And Google is the biggest and, in my view, the most intrusive, invasive, and controlling. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Cheryl Fleming, Billy Cook, Terry Paris, and look, Brian Carey just took out a new $5 a month subscription. Thank you, Brian. You're setting a great example for other people. And I want people to follow that example if you're so inclined. Just click on to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, choose Become a Subscriber. Boom, you land on the sign-up page, and you can take care of business in a minute or two. Choose the level of support that's comfortable for you and set up a PayPal subscription. You don't like PayPal? Yo comprendo. You can use the U.S. mail. My mailing address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. And yes, I've got bonus books. Justin Frank's Trump on the Couch, available to you for a new annual subscription and a mailing address here in the continental U.S. Twitter yesterday put a block on the account of Christine Assange. She's the mother of Julian Assange. And I know that she follows me on Twitter. I pity the people who follow me on Twitter because I don't tweet very much. I tweet the information about each podcast that gets posted, but that's about it. Anyway, Joe Laurie at Consortium News reports that Miss Assange had her Twitter account blocked to what Twitter called unusual activity. No explanation has been given, but her recent tweets, well, she's pretty direct. She replied to Hillary Clinton and John Bolton Bolton had tweeted on March 9th, the U.S. military should use WikiLeaks for cyber warfare target practice, take down their capabilities, and prevent further harm to national security. And Ms. Assange had tweeted fascist talk. Now, Julian has been blocked from Twitter. They deleted his account almost a year ago, March 28th of 2018. And among his last tweets was a link to a podcast interview that I had just posted with James Bamford that was related to the Russiagate narrative. Over at the New York Times, they have concocted a preview of the Mueller report. It reads, "The Mueller report is highly anticipated. Here's what we already know." Now, first of all, nobody knows what's in the Mueller report. We know who he's been talking to. We know the witnesses who've testified. We know the people who've been indicted. We know that he's won convictions from people who didn't have anything to do with Russian manipulation of the American election in 2016. And so this is so fanciful. They treat as fact the following statement: Russian hacking and WikiLeaks. As part of a complex effort to sabotage the campaign of Hillary Clinton, Trump's 2016 rival, Russia's top military intelligence service hacked the computer networks of Democratic organizations and the private email account of the chairman of the Clinton campaign and released tens of thousands of stolen emails through WikiLeaks to the public, according to an indictment filed by Mueller. Only the Russians have been charged. Get that? The Russians who will never come to a U.S. court. It is a very convenient mirage that Mueller has created here. But by failing to indict anybody who is alleged to have conspired with the Russians, we have what is exposed as a one-sided operation by the Russians. And of course, we're busy hacking away, just like John Bolton suggested we could do to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks every damn day. And that is all excised from the accounts, and we are led to believe that there was this dastardly plot that caused Americans to lose their minds. Second item on the list here, the Russian social media manipulation. And I have covered that until I'm blue in the face and out of breath. They're making a 10 out of a 2 at best, or a 10 out of a 0.5. Yes, there were Russian actors who put some weird messages on social media in 2016, but the Trump campaign spent $80 million on social media. That doesn't get talked about. And I've learned that this year alone, the Trump campaign has outspent all of the Democrats combined in social media advertising. You just don't see it because you and I aren't considered targets of Trump campaign activities. Soledad O'Brien came out of San Francisco. She worked at CNET. Then she was hired by CNN, was an anchor. And I didn't even know she had left, and I don't know if she was fired or quit. But she gave an interview to BuzzFeed criticizing the network where she used to work. And she takes on the way CNN assembles these panels of people, these so-called experts. And they talk to death whatever the breaking news happens to be. And instead of actually reporting the story, we get all of this hot air commentary. And they always have way too many people on, including somebody who's a total doofus. And Soledad O'Brien says that having political pundits and elected officials screaming about Trump, who often don't even know what the hell they're talking about, it's just bull. It's a rating grabs, and it's cheap. She says, as someone who's familiar with the pay structure, how you book a story, and exactly what goes into all those meetings, I'm very critical of an organization that I think could do much better, could serve people better. Well, I don't know to what detail her critique goes. For example, about promoting Russiagate. But on the surface, I have no quibble with what she's saying there. Margaret Sullivan at the Washington Post makes a good point. That with over, 14, 15 people running for the Democratic nomination, the corporate media has focused on Beto, Biden, and Bernie. And it's true. We've got all these great women running. There are unusual people like Pete Buttigieg or whatever his name is, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And they don't get equal time. No, they don't even attempt it. And Sullivan notes that women are feeling a little bit left out. Author Rebecca Traister is quoted. She woke up one morning this week thinking that being a white man might be a disadvantage in this diverse field. But she said on Twitter, the reality is quite the opposite. Early metrics would show it to be an extremely powerful polling and fundraising boon, as it has always been. The Department of Homeland Security is denying that it targets journalists, among others, in its tracking system at the southern border of the United States. And a photographer, freelancer named Ariana Dressler, has been stopped 3 times now, where they give her extra screening because she has discovered that she's in a database. And a bright green X has been placed over her face to indicate that an alert has been placed on her passport. She is in a database. And this is deeply disturbing as they monitor the work of the media operators, the reporters. And this reminds me of what Russell Tice told us some 10 years ago, that when the NSA was developing its domestic surveillance programs, they carved out special treatment for journalists. And they argued, I heard Mike Hayden say this publicly many times, that it was intended to protect the journalists so that their communications would not be intercepted. But Tice indicated that it clearly was a way of targeting those journalists. Interesting news from an activist group. There is a bill that's been introduced in the House, H.R. 530, to end the federal preemption of the installation of 5G wireless technology. Now, the bill is being carried by a Silicon Valley Democrat, Anna Eshoo, who I know, and she, I don't think, is concerned about the health and environmental impacts of 5G. Those are critical issues. But one way to stop 5G is to empower local governments whose role was preempted by federal action at the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. So this is an important step. I think it advances the right kind of regulation, but maybe for the wrong reasons. And finally today, I have linked to a long read at BuzzFeed about wrongful convictions in Chicago. And yesterday we talked about the role of misidentification in eyewitness lineups leading to wrongful convictions. And today I credit Melissa Segura, the reporter at BuzzFeed, who tells us how a convict named Francisco Vicente was beaten by Chicago police until he agreed to sign a phony confession. And he did it 5 times. He framed 5 men for murder. And prosecutors put him on the stand to tell those lies and then rewarded him while he was in prison with access to good meals, new clothes, and sex in the big house. It's a fascinating story, and it shows the corruption in Chicago. And it's not limited to bad cops. They're the leading cause of the problem. But we have dirty prosecutors who enable the cops to frame and convict falsely these kinds of individuals. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.